call our Board of Adjustment for the 12th of February, 12th of March, 2025. I'm reading all minutes to order. And start with approving the agenda and the minutes from last month.
Mr. Chair, I have some possible corrections to the minutes. Under new business, it says that you were elected as the chair of the Planning Commission. I think the minutes should state Board of Adjustment, and also for Brad being vice chair. Just a simple thing. And with that, I would approve the minutes with those changes.
And the agenda.
And the agenda, yes.
We've got a motion for approval. Do we have a second?
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. We will start with Track Cabins LLC, file number 2025-1V. Neva.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a variance request for after-the-fact relief from Cook County Zoning Ordinance for the following on a substandard lot of record. Item A, the bird's nest deck at a reduced ordinary high water level shoreline setback of 55 feet. And item B, the fox den deck at a reduced ordinary high water level shoreline setback of 35 feet within the shore impact zone and at a reduced side yard setback of 40 feet where a minimum side yard setback of 50 feet is required in the Resort Commercial Residential Zone District on Double Track Lake where a minimum structure setback of 100 feet is required, located at 18 Romans Road. The property is 1.31 acres with approximately 201 feet of Devil's Track Lake shoreline. The property is entirely within the Resort Commercial Residential Zone District. Newly created lots within this zone district must be 5 acres in size and 300 feet wide with water frontage. So this makes this a substandard lot of record. And the shoreline classification is recreational development. Mr. Kintop is requesting after-the-fact variance relief for 2 decks added onto 2 rental cabins at his resort, Double Track Lake Cabins. The decks were added by the contractor last year without permits and are both within the shoreline setback of Double Track Lake. The Fox Den cabin is also within the 10 feet of the side yard setback. Because the parcel is a substandard legal lot of record, meaning that it's smaller than the zone district standard requirements, variance relief is also required to allow the development on the substandard lot as well. Bird's Nest Cabin is a 520 square foot cabin. The 150 square foot deck is partially constructed approximately 55 feet from the shoreline. On page 6 of the Board of Adjustment packets are photos showing the deck as currently in its form relative to the shoreline and then also relative to the cabin itself. And then there's also Fox Den Cabin, which is a completed deck and 440 square foot cabin and a 100 square foot deck completed approximately 35 feet from the shoreline within the shore impact zone and 40 feet from the side yard line. And on page 7 of your packet are the photos of that deck. I included the ordinance citations here. There's, again, kind of 3 different sections of ordinances that trigger the variance relief. So the first is the actual standards for the zone district, as I mentioned. Because this lot was created prior to zone district standards, it's a legal lot of record, it gets to exist. And that's where you have the 50-foot side yard setback in the RCR. If this was a normal lakeshore residentially zoned lot, it would have been a 10-foot side yard setback. So it's just a quirky thing in this area. The second type of variance relief that's needed is, again, the lake setback. So again, we're looking at 55 feet and 35 feet from the lake setback for the 2 decks, one of which is in that shore impact zone. And I provided a little visual in the packets of what the shore impact zone area is. And then that third part is the language from Article 9 of the Cook County Zoning Ordinance. These non-conforming lot regulations come from state shoreline standards. So the state outlines how we as the county regulate and handle these smaller lots and when variances are required. So because the building site isn't meeting setback distances, it also needs a variance from that part of things. So, for background, Double Track Lake Cabin is the former site of BG's Resort, a historic resort dating back to the 1920s. In 1992, part of the resort was converted into residential properties, which created the Double Track Acres plat, while the remaining resort property became Double Track Lake Cabins. The property currently includes 5 cabins. Over the years, the parcel has received several variances. In 1990, there was a variance granted for the addition of Cabin 5, which was a shoreline setback relief. In 1993, the variance was approved for modifications to Cabin 6, also shoreline setback relief. And in 2021, an after-the-fact variance was required for the new construction within the side yard setback on what was identified as owner's residence. The 2 cabins originally had smaller stair and landings attached, which were removed and replaced with larger decks. The county assessor information shows in figure 6 of the packet, so that's on page 11, that the decks were 20 to 30 square feet in size for each cabin. The property owner became aware that the decks were constructed last year that were unpermitted only after the passing of their contractor. The applicants explained in the variance application that their contractor did not make them aware of the permitting variance requirements. I included the assessor's diagrams there, and I also did a shoreline setback averaging. So this is a tool that we have in the Cook County Zoning Ordinance to kind of benchmark what a reasonable shoreline setback variance would be. So it's a calculation where you take the adjoining properties within a certain search area, and then you look at what the principal residences are from the shoreline from them. And with that, the shoreline setback averaging calculation did not support a variance to be this close. All of the principal dwellings that I measured from the shoreline in this stretch of the lake were at least 80 feet or more from the shoreline. For site conditions and considerations, the property is served by a septic system with a new compliance inspection being issued in 2021. That's valid for 10 years. Impervious surface coverage requirements are met. Wetlands are not an issue. The slope is relatively flat. For shoreline health, given the time of year it is, it's pretty hard to see the vegetation along the shoreline at this site at the moment in time. I did include a figure in your packets that I could find from the assessor's files that shows kind of the main landing. So that's like the dock recreation area. So it's not really a probably fair viewpoint of what the shoreline is. It's all to say that I can't quite tell right now. So when we did our public noticing, we noticed it in the newspaper, as well as sent out 12 letters of notification to adjacent property owners, as well as county departments and the DNR hydrologist. We received a letter back from the neighbors, Jerry Wilkes and Anne Marie Marchand. They wrote a letter in support of the request, and the Cook County Environmental Health Officer, Mitch Everson, provided a memo that indicated the septic was in compliance. Cook County Soil and Water provided a technical memo that explains the declining water quality trend of Devil's Track Lake. That's primarily due to land use impacts. The memo includes data from water quality monitoring and emphasizes the importance of shoreline vegetative buffers to protect the lake from the effects of development. One quote from that memo states, "One of the more significant land use impacts are impervious surfaces. Impervious surfaces near Double Track Lake can have large nutrient impacts. If stormwater is not taken care of in a conservation-minded way, overland flow can cause the transport of nutrients to the lake. It's recommended that the stormwater be directed away from the lake or captured to minimize nutrient flow." The DNR area hydrologist also provided a technical memo outlining their review of the variance request relative to the practical difficulty standards. The DNR recommended denial of the variance based off of several reasons. One was that there was no unique circumstances associated with the property and that the variance request was needed for personal matters. They also found that the proposal was not reasonable given the purpose of the shoreline setback requirements. And then the DNR found the primary reason for the variance was a design preference, and approval of variance would be arbitrary and capricious, as written in their memo. For staff consideration for facts and findings, again, all variances are reviewed, whether they're after the fact or proposed, by the same standards as outlined in the Cook County Zoning Ordinance and in state rules. And in these are, again, my version of pulling out facts to fit into these findings. So after you hold a public hearing and ask questions and deliberate, you're more than welcome to amend these, but we need to have findings that support every decision that we make so that they're defensible. So The variance is consistent with the goals and policies of the Comprehensive Land Use Guide Plan and in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the Cook County Zoning Ordinance and other Cook County official controls. The Cook County Zoning Ordinance requires a 100-foot setback from recreational development lakes. The applicants are proposing a 35 and 55-foot setback from Track Lake for 2 decks, as well as the 50-foot side yard line setback in Cook County Zoning Ordinance. The relief being requested is a 10-foot encroachment, 40-foot setback. Cook County Zoning Ordinance, Section 9.01, does not identify allowances for expansion or additions onto nonconforming resort commercial structures. And I kind of glossed over this part, but it's just to clarify that when we have these structures that are within setback areas like this, it's legal for them to be maintained, to be improved, to be repaired, even to be replaced, but none of these structures have rights to expansion. And so that's a critical thing to kind of weigh and keep in mind, is that there's no inherent right to expansion, so it's your job to identify the practical difficulty for granting variances when we grant expansions for these types of structures. What makes some special from others is another way to think about that. I included citations from the Cook County Land Use Guide Plan that pulls out several different policies relevant to this type of request. For the second question, the proposed use of the property is allowed in the land use district in which the property is located. The draft finding is that the parcel is zoned resort commercial residential. The parcel is a substandard legal lot of record with 1.31 acres and approximately 201 feet of Track Lake shoreline. Resort uses are permitted, however, expansions onto non-conforming resort units are not permitted. The question number 3, the property owner is proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the Cook County Zoning Ordinance. While the inclusion of decks on resort structures is typical, the proposed deck sizes and their close proximity to the lake relative to the size of the cabins and the original decks raise questions regarding the reasonableness of the proposal. If the project had been submitted prior to construction, staff would have recommended minimizing the size of the proposed deck expansion and locating the decks on the side of the building to reduce encroachment into the setback, as well as positioning any stairs to avoid further development within the shore impact zone. Reasonableness can be evaluated by considering both the size of the structure and the extent of the variance requested. In this case, the entire decks fall within the setback and significantly encroach over 50% into the setback area. The shoreline setback averaging calculation does not support the variance request, as the principal structures of neighboring properties are located more than 80 feet from the shoreline. And given the significant size of the proposed decks and their proximity to the lake shore, a more consistent approach would be involving angling or aligning the deck additions with the existing structure setback and reducing the deck footprint in relation to the size of the cabins. The next question, the property owner has established that a practical difficulty involved is due to circumstances unique to the property and not created by the property owner. The application states that the practical difficulty is due to the location of the existing cabins, and the larger decks are being added to enhance how guests are currently using the area around the cabins. From staff's perspective, the application has not demonstrated a valid practical difficulty because it's not unique to the property and is landowner created. Staff do not identify a valid practical difficulty necessitating the need for the variance. Next question, approving the variance, maintain the essential character of the locality. The resort, or the area is zoned resort commercial residential, and this would be a consistent use in this area. Several variances have been granted along Romans Road due to the more restrictive RCR zoning with larger side yard setback requirements. Most of those variances are either from road or side yard setback requirements, and the subject parcel is located at the dead end of the road, or on a dead end road. And then the last question, the property owner has established that the practical difficulty involves more than economic considerations alone. There would presumably be a cost to removing the decks, however, that cannot be the only reason to grant this variance request. Staff recommendations for consideration. Staff agrees with the findings of the DNR that the facts of this case do not present a sufficient practical difficulty to justify the variance. While it is unfortunate that the property owner was not accurately informed by their contractor, the variance request must still demonstrate a practical difficulty in order to justify approval. As a legal non-conforming lot with non-conforming structures, the parcel has the right to exist as a resort and the structures have the right to remain. However, there is no right to expansion of nonconformities. The board must determine whether the variance request meets the required standards for approval. Failure to meet any one of those criteria will result in the denial of the variance request.
Thank you, Neva. Would the applicant like to, if you'd like to speak, please state your name and address for the record?
Certainly. My name is Thomas Kintop, and I am the owner, co-owner along with my wife of Track Lake Cabins. We live here in town in Grand Marais, 121 East 3rd Street, and run the resort as a seasonal business. So as the NEVA laid out, yeah, we had hired a contractor in 2023 to build us, at that time, a couple of decks. Had the discussion with him at the time about permitting, and he assured us that permits were not required. That's on me for not following up further with that. He built 2 decks, one on our bear cave cabin, which is, wasn't permitted at the time, is well within all the setbacks, and is not part of this discussion. And then he built the one on the Fox Den cabin. He then, we then proceeded to continue business with him for 2 more decks, one on the Bird's Nest and one on, which we have not even begun work on yet, the Moose Meadow cabin. And he, last spring, he passed away, and when it landed back into my lap, that's when I dug into the permit, and then found out about the variance requirements. For the Fox Den cabin, understandably, the only thing I would say in that one is the side setback is no greater than, or, it doesn't encroach any further into this neighboring one than the previous stairs that were on the side of that cabin. We did not expand towards the side yard at all. And that would be Anne Marie in Jerry's place that sent a note of support. The purpose of the deck was to take the foot traffic out of the dirt that was, that was in front of the cabin. That space was already being used for seating, and at that time there was a barbecue charcoal grill there as well. By taking the foot traffic up out of the dirt, we've actually directed it more towards the path to the lake. It keeps the foot traffic out of the side yard, away from the neighbor's property line. So that was our reasoning for that. We also kept that one as a minimum. It is only a 10 by 10 deck, so that was our thinking behind that one. For Bird's Nest, again, they had just started the construction on that when our contractor passed. Once we realized the need for permitting and whatever, we froze construction on that until we got everything straightened out. We would be willing to forego that deck and go back to the original stair format, given that what's in front of the Bird's Nest is already a flat gravel surface where the guests usually will sit around the fire ring or at a picnic table. So it doesn't really necessarily change the use or the configuration of that. That one was definitely more of a nice to have, and we'd be willing to let that one go. But we would like to try to save the work that's on the Fox Den cabin if possible.
Thank you. Does anyone else in the public wish to add anything to this application? Hearing none, we'll close it to the public and discuss it as a board. Start on my far left.
Mr. Chair, I did post hole around in the snow out there yesterday for quite a while. And to be honest, the side yard variance doesn't really bother me, but the lakeshore setbacks seem pretty egregious. I do agree with Mr. Kintop that there is that flat area in front of Bird's Nest, which appears to have been kind of the seating area, which seemed appropriate, and that deck just seems totally out of character with the shoreline. I mean, I will give a little bit of credit. I did walk the shoreline. I could tell the shoreline seems in better shape than some of the adjoining properties, but and credit to that. But I would not be in favor of these impacts onto the shoreline setback zone.
Courtney?
I agree with that mostly. The bird's nest cabin didn't bother me as much as the fox den cabin. I do feel that that deck is way too close as well.
I made a site visit as well. I agree, I think, given the nature of Devil Track and the fact that this is RCR rather than residential, the side yard doesn't bother me. But I would agree with Mr. Lee that it's very close to the lake, those two decks. And I would not be in favor, therefore. I think you also have the memo from Soil and Water, and there's pretty demonstrable water quality issues with Devil Track. And so I would not be in favor of contributing to those with such close structures.
Brett?
I also did a site visit with Bird's Nest. I agree that it's a wall plate. The screws are still exposed. It's pretty easy removal, not a large impact. When I looked at Fox Den, I too noted that the side set was in keeping with where it had been before. That made sense to me. I appreciate that. The deck itself is not very large, but when you add on the steps going towards the lake, you really start going out there, because that's one, there's that drop, and it gets to be a lot longer staircase. So I'd be, willing to entertain if the rest of the board is considered that they remove the steps, since it's already a completed deck, and have finished the wall off there, and we accept that 10-foot encroachment on Fox Den, none on Bird's Nest, because that's been removed. But I just offer that as the steps are where we really start to jut out there, but the rest of it is completed, and it's sort of,
May I
know,
make
if I
two
wanna be
statements about that?
punitive. I'm sorry, sir.
I was just wondering if I may make two statements regarding that.
Yeah.
So the first thing is, obviously, is we understand the steps, but if we remove the steps, that will just put the foot traffic through the trees closer to the side yard, because that would be the only way to access the lake then from that cabin. The previous stairs came down out of the side door and directed the traffic down that same path. And while I understand that there are legal definitions of impervious surfaces, I would, argue that a deck is not an impervious surface, and the water runoff is no different than it was prior to the deck being there. But I also understand, there are obvious rules and regulations regarding this. The other question I would have is it's my understanding that if I were to build that same platform of that same footprint on the ground, no higher than 12 inches off the ground, I would not need a permit or a variance for such a thing.
That may be true, and I think I would reference staff for that, but.
That's actually an area of our ordinance that we're looking to clarify the language significantly. Currently, the land use permits are required, decks qualify once you're 12 inches or more off the ground. So people have been finding some gray area with the 12 inches or less. Interpreting that, though, in theory, a person could just do full 12 inches or less platforms on their whole shoreline. Like, that wouldn't really be in compliance with the spirit and intent of our shoreline regulation. So we as staff recognize that we need to, and I'm not saying that that's what you're suggesting. I'm just-
No.
We've been talking about this a lot, that it's
Well-
confusing for landowners and it's confusing for staff. So on the back burner are some draft ordinance proposals to clarify that language. Currently, we work off of like a square footage, but I don't have at the top of my head of what that policy application has been.
Yeah, and not to put Neva on the spot, but we did have this conversation, and particularly around our Moose Meadow cabin, and what our options are over there. And I'm not saying that's what we would necessarily do, but I guess ultimately my defense would be that the deck itself does not change the way the land is used, the amount of runoff or the direction of the runoff. And if there is an issue, we would be more than happy to put gutters on and direct any runoff from the actual cabin back and away from the lake itself. But there's a pretty good buffer of vegetation that goes along there, and unfortunately, I didn't file this until the snow flew, so we did not get a chance to get, really good pictures of what was going on. But
Thank you. I guess I would ask the members of the board, would we like to go through our findings of facts, or are we?
Absolutely.
Go through it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's
I think I'm
rather
starting.
extensive documentation to be addressed, but
Proposed use of the property is allowed in the land use district in which the property is located. No, I'm starting in the wrong spot, sorry.
One more page.
Is the variance consistent with the goals and policies of the comprehensive land use guide plan and in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the Cook County Zoning Ordinance and other Cook County official controls? How do you guys?
you have a different numbering system because of the size of your package.
Yeah, well, that was why I'm a little.
We're on 14.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
14.
I think, to my mind, yes, in the sense that it's RCR, and it certainly makes sense to be using it as a resort. I think the biggest hangup, as referenced in these, is thinking about the water quality and the environmental impact on the lake. Hangs that up for me.
I would agree with Paul on that.
All right. Proposed use of the property is allowed in the land use district in which the property is located.
Yes.
Yes. The property owner is proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the Cook County Zoning Ordinance.
It's difficult insofar as the encroachment towards the lake is consistent just with wanting to add a deck. And how reasonable that becomes when our ordinance say we don't want to have encroachment into the shore impact zone with additional structures, in the sense that the structures, grandfathered in with its existing size as it was when it was permitted. So, I'm more, it gets reasonable to me when we're looking at a circumstance where there's no other choice. All right, there's some people who just, when you get on their property, we had one last month, I think it was, or 2 months ago, where that was the only really decent place for them to put their cabin. On Caribou Lake. And, that's one where it was pretty straightforward to say that was reasonable in what we were doing. This one seems generated by a desire, not a land restriction that just says you can't fit within the parameters.
I would also cite the shoreline setback averaging as a guide, looking at the surrounding properties on Devil Track, which we already, like I've mentioned, has issues, and that this is so much further in than the shoreline setback averaging, I think, is what flags it for me.
And I think it's along the same line, the use is allowed as a non-conforming use because it's grandfathered in, but that doesn't allow for any expansion. And that's a pretty standard discussion item on this. It's non-conforming. There are certain things you can do, but there are certain things you cannot do. An expansion of the footprint into an impact zone is one of them.
And a pretty substantial
Yeah, it's not just-
addition
not
relative
just-
to the cabins.
Yeah, it's
the
not
size of the
100, not
cabins.
12 inches or
Right.
anything, yeah.
Moving on, the next one. Property owner has established that the practical difficulty involved is due to circumstances unique to the property and not created by the property owner.
I think this is a fail.
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
Does approving the variance maintain the essential character of the locality?
I didn't look at the other properties, but I would say it probably does, in the sense that having a deck on your home is a pretty common desire for big shore owners.
Oh, it does get closer to the lake than the current
the
average
average, yes.
setback.
Yeah.
Yes, by quite a bit.
By quite a bit.
Has the property owner established that practical difficulty involves more than economic considerations alone?
I don't think so. I don't see a practical difficulty in needing to place the decks in that location.
Okay, yep.
And any other discussion or look for a motion?
I'll just offer that, as everyone's listening to this, right, we're required to go through these questions, and a failure on one of them is a failure on all. And, following the process and the laws in terms of what we're doing. We're here to help people when they have to color outside the lines. But there's certain times when that gets, if it doesn't pass these 7 questions, we don't have the choice anymore. So I just want to make sure that the whole public understands that as we go through this process here. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to deny the after the fact variance for this one.
Okay.
I would second that.
We've got a motion and a second. Any more discussion, or we'll call for?
Do we have any interest in also adding an offer to go back and align with staff and see if they can come up with some suitable compromise?
I didn't quite catch that, what?
Do we need to add anything that would say that we would ask the petitioner to go back to staff and realign with you for possible alternatives as he fails this? Or is that just something he can do anyways?
Yeah, I mean, we can connect on that
Okay.
and think through.
No need for us to
alternatives.
say anything then.
If, I think it would be helpful if, if we got, I guess, some guidance, like, do you think keeping any deck expansion, if it was aligned with the setback of the cabin? Or like, some metrics so that I can help him understand what would be deemed as reasonable, but again, you're at that practical difficulty element. And so, I don't want to dangle a carrot and then we go through it again and then we come back to these same conclusions again. So what would be a practical difficulty in these circumstances if you wanted to have that type of discussion? Because as it is, I can't think of a way that would substantially change the findings that you've already drafted on this. And I think it would be platforms.
Well, no,
I think
that's
probably the solution.
That's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It is a helpful discussion
Yeah.
and an observation.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because I agree with you, we don't want to dangle something that we, have them spend effort and time on and
Yeah.
end up in the same spot.
And I can work with the Land Services Office on potential alternatives. I mean, any kind of a decking, whether it be off to the side, that would further encroach on the side yard. And the other only option would be into the back of which, doesn't serve me any practical purpose. So, unless there's a way to, like I said, pursue a platform solution or something that's less encroaching, we can forego what we've got. Definitely for Bird's Nest, we will start that deconstruction and just replace the existing, the previous stairs or something comparable. And then Foxton will do the same or try to find a solution that works.
And I would just to sum up what I think I heard in there, in our discussion is really, it's the lake setback averaging is just not really allowing that. There may be something that would be a smaller some option. That may be worth exploring, but I don't think we're going to get into that tonight. I think that is something to explore with
Yeah,
staff.
our challenge is, this cabin was built 100 years ago, and everything else around us was built much more recently. And so they all obviously meet the setbacks.
So right now, we've got a motion on the floor to deny these after-the-fact variances. We've got a second. I'd like to call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. Motion is denied. Variance is denied.
Thank you for your consideration.
We'll move to Keith and Keith and Robin Harmon, filed 2025 2V. Eva?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, this is a variance request for relief from the Cook County Zoning Ordinance to place an approximate 13 square feet of a screen porch approximately 4 feet into the bluff setback area where a 30-foot bluff setback is required at 191 Needham Road. The property owner is Keith Harmon, and the agents who were working on the application are Eric Johnson and Brett Bewer. The applicant's property includes 1.56 acres with approximately 165 feet of West Bearskin Lake shoreline. The parcel is contained within the Lake Shore Residential Zone District with FAR 1 Zone District on the backside. Newly created lots within LSR must be 1 acre in size and 150 feet wide at the structure setbacks. This is a conforming lot. And West Bearskin Lake is classified as a recreational development lake. And newly created lots on that zone district must be 150 feet wide and 1 acre in size. The applicants are proposing a variance from the top of bluff setback to place a 12 by 15 screen porch addition onto the existing cabin. The screen porch will encroach 4 feet into the top of bluff setback at a corner of the screen porch, amounting to approximate 13 square feet of the 180 square foot addition requiring variance relief. I included the bluff language that requires the setback requirements. So the Cook County Zoning Ordinance outlines that no structures are allowed within the bluff impact zone, and that the setback from the top of bluff is 30 feet. So this is outside of the bluff impact zone, but it's not meeting the 30-foot setback. For backgrounds, the property currently has a house, garage, and shed, all recently permitted and constructed beginning in 2014. During the original permitting, a survey of the property was completed and used extensively in the permitting process for the home. Records from the 2014 land use permit application for the garage show lengthy correspondence between land services staff and the contractor to place the structure close to the bluff and lake, still meeting setbacks to provide room for the septic tank and mound away from the lake. The current owners purchased the property in 2021 and had a new survey completed to prepare for this project. During this time, it was discovered that the house was placed 10 feet closer to the lake and bluff than stated on the permit, although existing development does still meet setback requirements. For site conditions and consideration, the property is served by a septic system, which was installed in 2014. The certificate of compliance expired in 2024, so if approved, a new septic inspection request form will need to be submitted in conjunction with the land use permit. Impervious surface coverage requirements are met on this site. Wetlands are not an issue driving the need for the variance. For slope, the property has a bluff between the lake and the building site. The application indicates that the practical difficulty preventing the addition of the screen porch onto the side of the cabin is rock outcroppings on the side of the cabin. And for shoreline health, the existing shoreline vegetation is primarily naturally vegetated with mature trees and shrubs. I thought I had some photos. Oh, there it is. So there's some photos of the shoreline and quite an elevation change there, and the structure of the cabin. So where that overhang is, I believe that's going to be removed, and instead the screen porch will be added on. And so the corner of that screen porch that's closest to where this view is taken from, the corner of that screen porch would be encroaching in that top of bluff setback. For public comments, the application was noticed in the Cook County News Herald on February 14th, and 12 letters of notification were sent to adjacent property owners as well as county departments and the DNR hydrologist. 3 written comments were submitted by neighboring property owners, all in support of the request. Gretchen and Bob at 217 Needham Road support the variance, does not feel the variance will impact any neighbors, the view from the lake, nor environmental impacts. Kevin and Kari Smith at 183 Needham Road support the variance, points out that placing the addition in this location will be less visible than if it was placed on the side of the building. Indicates no negative impact to neighbor, environment, or lake users. And Kate Kallenberger at 135 Needham Road supports the variance. Additionally, the following agencies provided their comments. The Soil and Water Conservation District provided a technical memo that explains the importance of implementing best management practices for construction stormwater. And I would note the survey designs do show silt fence and construction stormwater management practices being implemented. And the DNR did not submit a comment letter on this variance request. For staff consideration of facts and findings, the variance is consistent with the goals and policies of the Comprehensive Land Use Guide Plan and in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Cook County Zoning Ordinance and other county official controls. The draft findings are that the zoning ordinance requires a 100-foot setback from the lake, and this is meeting that lake setback. And the zoning ordinance requires a 30-foot from top of bluff. The applicant is proposing a 4-foot encroachment into the top of bluff setback at a corner of the screen porch. The project avoids all encroachment into the bluff impact zone. I also included language from the land use guide plan for your consideration as well with different policies. The proposed use of the property is allowed in the land use district in which the property is located. Proposed finding the parcel is zoned lakeshore residential. The applicant's property includes 1.56 acres with approximately 165 feet of West Bearskin Lake shoreline. This is a conforming parcel. Residential uses are permitted in the zone district. The property owner is proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the Cook County Zoning Ordinance. An encroachment of 4 feet into the bluff setback is a reasonable request. The structure remains outside of the bluff impact area. The relatively minimal encroachment will make this project possible and therefore reasonable. The property owner has established that the practical difficulty involved is due to circumstances unique to the property and not created by the property owner. The property owner has demonstrated the natural landscape features of bedrock outcropping prevent the location of the addition into the side of the structure where it would be meeting setbacks. Approving the variance maintains the essential character locality. The area is zoned lakeshore residential. The subject parcel is located at the end of a dead-end road. The addition of the screen porch encroaching 4 feet into the bluff setback does not appear to alter the essential character locality and is unlikely to be noticeable from the lake. And economic considerations are not found to be a reason for the variance request. Staff recommendations for consideration. This is a relatively minor encroachment with only a corner of the addition within the bluff setback area, and the structure will remain outside of the bluff impact zone. Between the difficulties of the shoreline setbacks with the bluff, the septic components, and natural bedrock outcropping features, staff find the landscape does provide practical difficulties. If development of the property to date has tried to address and accommodate these features, the variance could be avoided if the applicant proposed a smaller screen porch. While this is a consideration that the board may choose to further discuss, weighing the benefits of the variance relief to the property owner versus the amount of variance relief requested or cost of the county is a way to say, by granting a little variance relief, this project will be possible and therefore it is reasonable. If approved, the following conditions may be attached to this variance request. Number 1, the property shall conform to Minnesota Rule 7080 and the Cook County septic requirements. The current certificate of compliance is no longer valid. A new septic inspection request form shall be submitted in conjunction with the land use permit application. And number 2, the addition of the permitted and constructed in accordance with the variance relief granted.
Thank you. Would you like to state your name and address and add anything to the narrative?
Yes, thank you. It's Keith Harmon. My address is 4703 Meadow Road in Edina, which is a first-tier suburb. My wife's not here tonight because she's home taking care of the dogs. I first want to thank the Commission, the Board of Adjustment for reviewing this and all the work that's gone into it. We did have a survey done. The bluff line there is very complicated as it goes in front of our cabin. It sort of trails off on one side and it's more pronounced on the other side. And where it actually disappears is sort of complicated. So that bluff setback line kind of crosses in front of the cabin where we want to put the three-season porch. It's all bedrock there, so we are very hopeful and believe there will be no heavy equipment brought in to build this. no serious digging. The builder is going to be Willie Anderson, who works for Crown, who just built the north schoolhouse, or the north schoolhouse here in town. So he does a lot of construction around here and is very familiar with it. Our goal was to build a seasonal, 3-season screen porch, and the variance is to put this in front of the cabin. If you put it on the left or the right, you have a much greater visual presence from the lake. Our cabin really almost cannot be seen from the lake. It's approximately 40 feet above the lake level, and in the summer, the green vegetation, you could drive a boat right by and you really can't see it. We really want to maintain that piece of it, and we feel like the screen porch will be right in front of the cabin. It won't add any visual presence from the lake. And I think this is supported by our neighbors, the one to our west and to our east, and another one to our east. And I guess that's about all I have to say. I don't believe we'll remove any vegetation to put this on, and there won't be any heavy construction equipment there.
Thank you. Is anyone else from the public here to speak on this application or variance? Hearing none, we'll close it to the public and discuss as a board. Brad, will you start?
In reviewing this package, the 4-foot encroachment, particularly with the bedrock component discussions that were brought up both by the applicant and by staff, are meaningful in the sense that the property is providing restrictions in terms of what's available, and going to the front, and the 13 square feet is quite minor. I don't see any particular benefit to the county in terms of denying it. I'd be supportive of the request.
Yeah, I think it's a very thoughtful application for a very minor variance of only 13 square feet. I'm comfortable with it, and I think the findings of fact lay that out well.
Yes, I agree.
I agree with both prior comments.
As well, plus I like it, it's outside the 100-foot lake setback, so I mean,
Yeah.
that bigger issue is there, taken care of,
Do we want to go through the findings, facts, or concur with staff's findings?
I've reviewed the staff findings a couple of times, and I'm in concurrence with their findings.
I can agree.
I would look for a motion.
I would make a motion to approve.
Motion? Do we
So
want
with
to
staff's
include
findings
the
and
two
conditions.
conditions?
Yeah, the staff has said on number 1, property shall conform to Minnesota Rule 7080, Cook County septic requirements, new inspection requirement, the addition of permitted construction in accordance with variance relief granted. So I would say that we make a motion to approve with staff recommendations
Acceptable to that.
incorporated.
Yep.
Courtney, do you agree with that?
Yes.
So we've got a motion. Did we have a second?
I'll second.
We've got a motion and a second. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Variance is granted.
Approved.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time and diligence.
Thank you.
I'll send you a memo tomorrow.
Say that.
I'll send you a memo following this.
Fabulous. Thanks very much. Have a good evening.
You too.
We'll move to, am I on the right? Item C, William Beckstrand, case 2025-3V. Neva?
Hey, Mr. Chair, this is a variance request for after-the-fact relief from the Cook County Zoning Ordinance, Section 7.05, to place an approximate 147-square-foot screen porch at a reduced Lake Superior shoreline setback of 34 feet, where a minimum of 40 feet is required at 22 Mossy Hollow Point. The applicant's property is 11.16 acres with approximately 310 feet of Lake Superior shoreline. The parcel is entirely within the single-family R1 zone district. Lot size requirements for that zone district on Lake Superior is that lots must be 1 acre in size and 200 feet wide of the structural setback. This is a conforming parcel. And Lake Superior is classified as a general development lake, and its development standards are outlined in the North Shore Management Plan and adopted in Article 8 of the Cook County Zoning Ordinance. Mr. Beckstrand is requesting after-the-fact variance relief to allow the 147 square foot porch to remain within the Lake Superior setback. The porch encroaches approximately 6 feet into the shoreline setback. The porch was not issued a land use permit before it was constructed between 2017 and 2018. I included the ordinance citation for the sections, Article 7, the shoreline setback standards, which for Lake Superior require 40 feet from vegetation line for building setback. For backgrounds, the property currently has a house, shed, deck, and outhouse. In 2017, the applicant applied for and received a land use permit for a 480 square foot 2-story house with a 60 square foot deck. I included the permit number as well as a site sketch from what staff have on file from that permit. As you can see in that permit application, it was, and a lot of this we'll get to, but it was permitted from staff's perspective to be kind of a rectangle square building. The land use permit was amended in e-permitting to also include a 600 square foot pole building and carport. In 2023, the County Assessor's Office conducted their regular review, which provided a record of the development and is shown in Figure 4. And I don't think I outlined that very well in the slides, so I'm not going to try to convey them on there, so I apologize. Back to the packet. So in 2024, no additional land use permits were applied for until October 2024, when Mr. Beckstrand applied for a land use permit for a garage. During that site visit with staff, for the garage land use permit, staff noticed that the additional construction had occurred exceeding the permitted 16 by 30 2-story house that was permitted in 2017. In the variance application, Mr. Beckstrand explains that the screen porch was constructed in 2017 to 2018 under the land use permit issued by Cook County Land Services. This is how he interpreted that permit, but from the actual permit standpoint, it wasn't included in that original permit. The permit in 2017 for the house had a 60 square foot deck with it that wasn't identified for the location. There wasn't anything in the 2017 permit that indicated the 147 square foot screen porch as far as its location or being a part of the building footprint. Mr. Beckstrand has explained in his variance application that he interpreted the county's land use permitting process as an allowable range of development. Although he applied for and received his land use permit for the cabin with specific dimensions, he was thinking that he was allowed to develop additional structures up to the maximum square footage range for the fee schedule without needing to amend the permit. The land use permit was for a 1,020 square foot cabin and deck. The corresponding permit fee was $200 for the category of the 1,000 to 3,000 square foot of building. Mr. Beckstrand has explained in his variance application that when the porch was constructed, it was meeting the 40-foot structure setback requirement, and there's been substantial loss to the shoreline and vegetation since 2017, making it now non-conforming. In the packets, I've included some kind of excerpts from that 2017 land use permit indicating that the original structure that was permitted through Land Services was a more rectangular, standard size structure. And then also we include some language from the Cook County Assessor's Office. That's kind of a snapshot in time of all of the developments present at that point in time. So the 147 SPSF, the screen porch square footage, is on the county assessors indicating that there. For site considerations, the property is served by a permitted outhouse. For impervious surface coverage, the parcel meets impervious surface coverage requirements. Wetlands are a significant feature on this parcel. Although the parcel has a lot of acreage, a lot of the acreage is consumed by wetlands. So Mr. Beckstrand has a wetland delineation that's been used and referenced, and he's been very diligent and patient with the wetland permitting process for the build out of this parcel. So the wetland delineation is on page 73. And that is kind of what leads you then on page 74 of your packet. There is detail B is kind of what shows as building area. So it's in the south corner of that parcel is kind of your upland area by the lake, if you will, of the 11 acres. And so that is where all of his development has to kind of be focused on that, so he doesn't run amiss with state wetland regulations. Obviously, the slope is pretty flat because there's so many wetlands. For shoreline health, the applicant has indicated that significant erosion has occurred to the shoreline during the years of high water level on Lake Superior. Land use specialist Mitch Travis put together a kind of desktop analysis to try to indicate where that vegetation line may have changed over time to correspond relative to the structure location. And so if you're on page 74 of your packet and also on your screens is kind of the comparison. So the yellow is showing the approximate location of the 2023 vegetation line, and the blue is showing the 2018 vegetation line. And the green polygons is the approximate location of the actual building, with the screen porch being the closest point to that yellow shoreline erosion area. So kind of the big picture is Mr. Beckstrand built the screen porch when he built his house, thinking that it was permitted with the house, and it was meeting 40 feet at that point in time. And then the erosion happened, and then it came to our attention that it wasn't permitted. So now here we are, and it's not conforming. So just for a broad overview. I did the shoreline setback averaging. It wasn't very helpful because there's not a lot of development in this area. There was one structure on the point east of him that is about 23 feet from the shoreline but everything else is either conforming or undeveloped. So shoreline setback averaging wasn't a very useful benchmark in this location for this application. For public comments, the application was legally noticed in the Cook County News Herald on February 14th. 10 letters of notification were sent to adjacent property owners as well as county departments and the DNR hydrologist. No written comments were received from adjoining property owners during written comment period. The land use specialist provided a memo that explained his understanding of the site visit during permitting. And he understood that he was verifying the area identified in the land use permit, not necessarily for the screen porch. The Cook County Soil and Water Conservation District provided a technical memo that explains the importance of quality of shoreline vegetation to protect against receding shorelines. The site's primarily composed of rock with minimal soils. Root systems from vegetation is important to protect against further erosion where possible. And the DNR did not submit a comment letter on this variance request. For staff consideration for facts and findings, first question, the zoning ordinance requires a setback of 40 feet from the vegetation line of Lake Superior. The applicant is proposing a 34-foot setback. And then I outlined certain goals that are outlined in the Cook County Land Use Guide Plan. The proposed use of the property is allowed in the land use district in which the property is located. The parcel is zoned single-family residential. The property includes 11.16 acres with approximately 310 feet of Lake Superior shoreline. Residential uses are permitted in the zone district. The property owner is proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the Cook County Zoning Ordinance. It is reasonable to request add a screen porch to the entrance of a dwelling. The screen porch is encroaching into the shoreline setback approximately 6 feet, with much of the screen porch being situated outside of the setback area. Reasonableness can be evaluated by considering both the size of the structure and the extent of the variance requested. In this case, a portion of the screen porch is within the setback area and encroaches 6 feet into the setback area. Aerial imagery supports the notion that some shoreline erosion may have occurred since the original cabin development began in 2017. Next question, the property owner has established that practical difficulty involved is due to the circumstances unique to the property and not created by the property owner. The property has a significant amount of wetlands that have created a corner of the property by the lakeshore, limited availability for conforming development. The screen porch is placed within a tight location between the building, side yard, and shoreline. The property owner has explained that the screen porch was placed in 2017-2018 timeframe, during which time there was more shoreline distance and that this was placed meeting the 40-foot setback. Staff have reviewed the aerial imagery and agree that this does appear that there's been erosion activity. Next question, approving the variance maintain the essential character locality. It's unlikely that approving the variance will alter the essential character locality. And the property owners established that practical difficulty involves more than economic considerations alone. There would likely be cost in minimizing the screen porch to comply with the structure setback requirement. However, this cannot be the only reason to grant the variance relief. For staff consideration, recommendations for consideration. The chosen building site is limited in expansion options between the property lines, wetlands, and shoreline. Further consideration for facts and findings, staff find that there may be findings that support the approval of the variance request. With the shoreline erosion occurring, the property owner should be diligent in future construction projects that may become non-conforming due to additional erosion in the future. And staff recommends future development includes staking out proposed construction locations with corresponding detailed permits. The applicant should also consider further consultation with the Soil and Water Conservation District to improve the shoreline vegetation to stabilize the shore. If approved, the following conditions may be considered. Number 1, a land use permit is completed for the addition. And number 2, the vegetation within the shore impact zone, 20 feet from vegetation line, is maintained to include trees and shrubs for the purposes of stabilization of the shoreline.
Thank you, Neva. Mr. Beckstrand, would you like to state your name and address for the record and add anything to the narrative?
Bill Beckstrand, 22 Mossy Hollow Point in Hovland. And I don't really have much to add other than I did hear back from 5 of the 10 letters that went out in my own personal email and text all in support of the project and that they had absolutely no issues with it. And I didn't instruct them that they ought to write their own letters, but and I can't think of anything else.
Thank you. Is anyone from the public wish to speak on this application? Hearing none, we'll close it to the public and discuss as a board. Who wants to start?
I can start. I mean, I think, yeah, we described the whole property as a practical difficulty, given the wetlands. I think it's a good accounting of sort of the history of how we got to this moment. And I would say the biggest factor for me is that the movement of the vegetation line. I think that is what has set up this variance hearing, and I'm comfortable acknowledging that it was built to 40 at the time it was permitted, even though it wasn't permitted per se. That would have been dealt with separately, not in a variance hearing. So I'm comfortable with this as the findings of fact state.
Courtney, would you like to?
Yep, I am very comfortable with approving this as is.
Yeah, I would agree with Paul, because during this time period, that lake has gone up and come down 3 feet, and there has been some pretty extensive, and I know in some of my dealings with DNR over the years, loss of shoreline up to over a 5-year period can be included in consideration for shoreline reestablishment and things like that. So, it doesn't seem that 6 feet is a huge amount here.
Yeah, so a number of things I looked into. One is the 2017 variance. He was approved for a deck. That's at 60 square feet, and it was larger than that. But I also find that in that documentation that was provided, where that deck was going to go wasn't delineated either. So we kind of left with a circumstance where the applicant landowner ends up in sort of a, the ability to vary things somewhat. But I do also note that in the 2024 land use request for the garage, that he did show the deck and accurately depicted it. So it's further reinforces his beliefs that this was a perfectly legit thing to do. Figure 9 showing the vegetation erosion. You can see the shadows of the trees in the earlier picture. They're gone in the second picture. So good work by the staff in terms of bringing that to our attention in such a clear way. The request for the variance makes perfect sense to me, given that, and if prepared, I can make a motion.
Would we like to agree with staff's findings of
That's
facts
where
or
I'm
go
going.
through it on our own?
Yeah. Yep.
Do you guys
I would-
agree concur with staff?
I would make a motion that we approve this variance agreeing with the findings provided by the staff and using the conditions that the staff has put forth in the land use permit be completed for the addition and vegetation improvements on the property to help with erosion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
We've got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none? The variance is approved.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for the work you all do.
right, we will do Todd, apologize if I get the name wrong, Novaczyk. Variance 2025 4V. Neva?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a variance request for relief from the Cook County Zoning Ordinance to place a 14-foot by 43-foot two-story addition onto the principal dwelling 50 feet from the shoreline setback of West Pope Lake, which is a special recreational development lake, where the 100-foot setback requirement is located at 8827 Old Gunflint Trail. The property owner is Todd Novaczyk, and the agent for the application is Richard Olson. The property includes 2.19 acres with approximately 147 feet of West Pope Lake shoreline. The parcel is contained within the Lakeshore Residential Zone District as well as FAR 3 Zone District. Newly created lots within the LSR zone must be 1 acre in size and 150 feet wide at the structural setback. And for shoreline classification, West Pope Lake is classified as special recreational development lake. Newly created lots on this classification of lake must be 200 feet wide and 1.5 acres in size. This makes it a non-conforming parcel due to the lot width requirements. The applicant is requesting a variance from the shoreline setback requirements to place a 14 by 43 foot two-story addition onto the existing non-conforming grandfathered cabin. The addition will increase the height of the structure approximately 10 feet higher than the current peak of the cabin. The application indicates that the cabin is planned for improvements, including weatherization, new windows, new heating, and a drilled well, and is described as a multi-generational vacation home. The addition will provide additional bedrooms and bathrooms. I included the ordinance citation for that special recreational development lake classification in the packets. And the special recreational development lake classification is a local Cook County specific classification, which requires greater lot width and lot area and setback requirements from standard recreational development lake classifications. The wider lot width and area requirements result in less dense shoreline development. Residential non-conforming structures in shoreline area are granted certain rights under Minnesota state statutes to be allowed to exist and can be repaired and maintained and even replaced in its exact configuration without variances. However, there is no inherent right to expansion of these structures. For structures such as this that do not meet the 50% of the structure setback requirements, there are stipulations to increase the structure setback if feasible should the original structure be destroyed. I included that language in the state rules just for reference on page 96 of the packets. On page 97 is an excerpt from the application that shows the addition location, which is slightly offset from where the cabin location is. So part of the addition will also be visible from the lake. For background, the property currently has a house, garage, small water-oriented accessory structure, a fish house, and an outhouse. County assessor records confirm the house was built pre-zoning requirements with an actual build year date of 1964. In 1984, a variance was granted to place a deck onto the cabin 8 feet from the shoreline. The approval was granted on the determination that no other cabins are visible in this area and heavy shoreline vegetation will screen the proposed deck and vegetation to be removed in front of the deck. In 1989, a variance was granted to place the garage 81 feet from the shoreline. The variance was granted on the determination that the low area creates a hardship for building further back. The photo on the screen and on page 98 of the packet is from the 1984 variance file for the deck, showing the vegetation that was in front of the cabin, between the cabin and the lake previously. On page 99 of your packet is a photo of the current deck today as viewed from the shoreline during winter conditions, obviously, and the back side of the cabin where the addition is proposed. For site conditions and considerations, for septic, the Cook County Environmental Health Specialist Mitchell Everson provided a memo that explains that the current cabin is served by a 2-bedroom, 225-gallon per day septic system. The addition of bedrooms, additional dwellings, water-using devices, or other factors will likely affect the operation of the septic, and a licensed septic designer will need to design and accommodate these factors. Additionally, the current septic was last inspected in 1994, and a new compliance inspection will be required. The parcel meets impervious surface requirements. Slope is not an issue driving the need for the variance. For shoreline health, due to the close proximity of the cabin and its deck, there's minimal shoreline buffer between the cabin and the lake. The 1984 deck variance was granted under the condition that shoreline vegetation would screen the deck from the lake. Today, the cabin and deck are highly visible from the lake under current conditions, and screening isn't a viable option given the narrow width of shoreline between the lake and the cabin. Figures 3 and 4 in the packet kind of outline the current visibility of that. For wetlands, Cook County Land Use Specialist Mitch Travis lended a hand in providing an analysis of the approximate wetland boundaries, which are kind of confined by the topography. As you drive in on the driveway, there's a dip where the power line is, and that's where the wetlands are, and then you go back up the hill and you're out of the wetlands again. By this estimate, using the topographic lines and the approximate wetland boundaries, staff estimate that there's approximately 187 to 213 feet of building upland area between the wetlands and the lake on this lot. That is being noted because the location of the garage, when the garage was granted a variance, indicated that there was wetlands immediately behind the garage, and was indicating that there's only about 105 to 110 feet of upland area between the lake and a swamp. This is obviously an inaccurate description of the site conditions, and as staff said, there's more location behind the garage for building area than what that original variance was making that decision based off of. We obviously have better technology and information today than we had back in 1989. For shoreline setback averaging, staff evaluated section 7.12 of the Cook County Zoning Ordinance to do that evaluation. This provision is to analyze the shoreline setback variances relative to surrounding land development. This only applies into certain circumstances, including in areas where development exists on both sides of a proposed building site. Water or road setbacks may be varied to conform. On this property, there is no development on the west side of the subject property, where it's federal land, and therefore this provision does not apply to this property. So there is no shoreline setback averaging component to this analysis. For other considerations, West Pope Lake is largely surrounded by federal lands. The subject property is in a small cluster of private land on the south shore. This is likely why the lake was designated a special recreational development lake, to maintain that character. For public noticing, the application was legally noticed in the Cook County News Herald on February 14th with 12 letters of notification to adjacent property owners as well as county departments and the DNR hydrologist. On figure 10 on page 103 of your packets is the aerial imagery that shows the subject property in a yellow square. For public comments, from that mailing that we sent out, written comments were submitted by the following adjacent property owners. Thomas Hayden at 8810 Old Gunflint Trail wrote a comment letter opposed to the request, stating that it generally seems to indicate that this would not fit the character of the area. And Charles Mancy at 8807 Old Gunflint Trail wrote in a comment letter opposed to the request, and cites earlier variance reliefs granted and the expansion of the height of the structure, opposed to the addition without the removal of the original structure. Cook County Soil and Water Conservation District provided a technical memo that discussed stormwater and spruce budworm. This memo explains that in this area, it wasn't hit during the 2007 Ham Lake fire, but it's under significant pressure by spruce budworm, which has created a declining forest due to the high density of balsam fir. The memo also explains that West Pope Lake has not been monitored for water quality since much of the shoreline is federal public land and not subject to development pressure. The SWCD indicates that the greatest impacts to lakes are the addition of impervious surfaces near the lake, which increase nutrient load and stormwater runoff. This is typically mitigated by a vegetative buffer. The memo recommends that stormwater be directed away from the lake to allow infiltration into the soil rather than overland flow directly into the lake. The memo has provided recommendations to address erosion and sediment control. And the DNR area hydrologist provided a technical memo outlining their review of the variance request relative to the practical difficulty standards. The DNR recommends denial of the variance based off 3 reasons. There's no unique circumstances associated with the property, and the variance request is needed for personal matters such as family needs, design preference, and financial considerations. Number 2, the variance will alter the essential character of the area, citing the increase in impervious surface area in the setback zone and the visibility of the second-story addition from the lake with lack of vegetative screening. And the DNR finds the primary reason for the variance is a design preference, and approval of the variance would be arbitrary and capricious. For staff considerations for facts and findings, the Cook County Zoning Ordinance requires a setback of 100 feet from special recreation development lakes. The current cabin is entirely within the shore impact zone of the lake. The addition of the cabin would be placed away from the lake, but fully within that 100-foot setback. The Cook County Zoning Ordinance, Section 9.02 for non-conforming structures does not identify allowances for expansion onto non-conforming residential structures. I also included certain land use guide plan elements that talk about certain priorities for development across the county for your consideration. The next question, the proposed use of the property is allowed in the land use district in which the property is located. The parcel is zoned Lakeshore Residential. The lot is 2.19 acres with approximately 147 feet of West Pope Lake shoreline. Residential uses are permitted in the zone district. Number 3, the property owner is proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by Cook County Zoning Ordinance. Residential uses are permitted use in the LSR zone district. The size of the proposed addition and the close proximity of the current cabin suggests there could be some discussion by the Board of Adjustment as to whether this is a reasonable expansion due to the existing nonconformity. This is a significant amount of variance relief to grant when the alternative building space is available on the parcel and the visibility of the addition to the lake will be increased. Reasonableness can also be evaluated by considering both the size of the structure and the extent of the variance requested. In this case, the entire addition is fully within the shoreline setback area, and the addition increases the maximum height of the existing structure. Last question, the property owner has third to the last, sorry. Property owner has established the practical difficulty involved is due to circumstances unique to the property and not created by property owner. The application indicates that the addition onto the existing cabin is to allow for more use, as it is a generational family vacation home. The existing cabin is fully within the shore impact zone, so any addition onto the structure requires a variance. The application explains in question 2 that the site has typical terrain, and the application explains in question 3 that the cabin is a legal nonconformity. From staff's perspective, the application has not demonstrated a valid practical difficulty, nor can staff identify a valid practical difficulty necessitating the need for the variance. The proposed variance is requested because the landowner desires to expand an existing nonconforming structure. Practical difficulties cannot be created by a landowner. DNR finds that the facts do not support a valid practical difficulty being present and identify the main need for the variance as a landowner design preference. Variance question approving the variance maintain the essential care of the locality. West Pope Lake is largely undeveloped because land ownership surrounding the lake is federal land. Due to the close proximity of the structure to the lake and the expansion of the second story, this addition will be highly visible from lake users. And last question, the property owner has established the practical difficulty involves more than economic considerations alone. Economic considerations are not the reason for the variance request. Staff recommendations for consideration. Previous variance approvals included mischaracterizations that should be noted. The deck variance was granted with the finding that the shoreline vegetation buffer would screen the deck and cabin from the lake. The buffer has diminished and does not visually screen the structure from the lake. The garage variance was granted based on incorrect information regarding wetland proximity to the lake. The wetlands are approximately 200 feet from the lake, providing conforming building locations closer to the lake, as well as additional space south of the wetlands near the road. Staff agrees with the findings of the DNR that the facts of this case do not present sufficient practical difficulty to justify granting the variance. While existing non-conforming structures can be maintained and improved, there is no entitlement to expand them. Although the proposed addition is located away from the lake, it would increase the structure's height and remain visible. Furthermore, the increase in impervious surface coverage within the structure's setback area would contribute to greater stormwater runoff into the lake, and without a functional shoreline buffer to filter the runoff. The landowner's goal of increasing residential capacity can be achieved through the addition of a guest house. Cook County regulations permit a guest house without more restrictive size or setback requirements compared to the primary dwelling. The area south of the garage is suitable for this purpose. Wherever additional living space is constructed, the septic design considerations will also need to be taken into account. If the board determines that a practical difficulty is present and can identify findings that support a variance, staff recommend that the board consider the DNR findings for consideration for conditions of approval. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Neva. Would the applicant, would you like to add anything to the narrative? If you would please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, first of all, I'm Todd Novaczyk, oldest son of the developer of the property. Some of the things that have been raised, I think are erroneous, but also I have no way of corroborating why something was built, with a 10-foot error in the setback. It was built at 91 feet instead of the 100 feet. I have no way to explain that to you. I wasn't there, and I don't know. So, but I think, with all due respect, ladies and gentlemen, I think, given what I think I understand staff's position certainly is, and also a very concerning letter from the DNR, with a number of comments in there that I think are really over the top. I would beg you to consider allowing me to table this for another month, and so I could better get my arms around some of the salient points in the comments, from both staff and the DNR. I think it certainly would help me understand better the why behind some of the comments or some of the decisions, and the position of denial from both staff and DNR. So I would ask if that's possible. I don't know what your protocol is here, but if I could table this, allow me to go do some more research, homework. I'm acting on behalf of our family, and I would love to come back with more preparation or better understanding, so I could be clear in my responses. And right now I just feel that it feels a little overwhelming. So.
Okay. I wouldn't see any issue with tabling. Is that reasonable?
Certainly, as long as if you do table, a couple of things to keep in mind. Table it, noticing the date that it would be reconvened. Also, once there is a motion to table, there's no more discussion. So, have whatever discussion you want to have, be cautious about when you choose to make that motion. And we do have a meeting planned for April, second Wednesday.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that you're saying there can be no discussion when we come back?
Yeah, no, it's just.
Once the board tables it, we cannot discuss it any further.
Yeah.
So
They can
Open
tell it
meeting
before
law,
they make
right.
the motion.
it's kind of a rule of order for how we do things. And I would agree with you. I think we should discuss it to provide the applicant some insight into some of the issues we might want to consider.
At the moment, we're still in our public comment
Okay.
portion.
Sorry.
So we'll open it to the public. If anyone would like to speak on this item, you're welcome to do so now. Hearing none, we're going to close it to the public and discuss as a board. Jeff?
My apologies on that. I think I did visit the site. It was an interesting trip, to say the least. And a couple of things that really struck me that need to kind of be considered here is the impact that the current structure has on the lakeshore. There's a pretty noticeable loss of vegetation, and even with the snow, it's really obvious there's some erosion happening on that shoreline. West Polk Lake is an extremely sensitive lake because it's very shallow. Its average depth is less than 6 feet, so any additional land use changes on it that increased runoff could be very noticeable very rapidly. So it's important we think about that. The other part is there's going to need to be a new septic system because there are changes to it. And that setting on top of the hill next to the lake starts to become rather restrictive. As you go, that wetland is in the depression between between the county road, and that kind of bifurcates this property. So there's some real issues, but yeah, putting this big a structure that close to the lake, especially given as how the roof runoff on the current structure is directed to the lake shore now, there'd have to be some real consideration about how that's taken care of.
I would like to add that it also would change the essential character going up, adding it from the lake. It's definitely going to be a bigger, much bigger in sight, in view from the lake.
I also made a site visit today, actually, before the meeting, and I would concur with what a lot of Mr. Lee said. It's a tight site, but I do see what staff alluded to with the space to the is that the south of the garage, going towards the wetland. I do believe there is space there that would be buildable and not have the same impact on the lake. I'm also looking, I think the drawing that Mr. Olson did is very helpful in showing the 50-foot impact zone and 100-foot setback and where that lands on the existing structures. I think relative to a lot of what we've heard tonight, we've talked about little encroachments and big encroachments, and this is putting a big encroachment square in the setback. So that's a concern of mine, for sure.
Yeah, I consider the setback, or excuse me, the encroachment being requested is quite up there on the scale to the negative, which is why I think we see so many reports coming from DNR and staff, not in favor of this. I'd also offer that when we're talking about shoreline erosion, I'm looking at figure 12 in the package, and I see stumps. So trees have been purposely cut down. Not in keeping with the direction of the previous variance that vegetation would cover the deck as it was shown in the previous figure. So just a number of things there that are concerning with respect to protecting the lake itself. And Mr. Lee's observations about the lake being shallow, I was unaware of that, but that's certainly meaningful as well in terms of my consideration.
I think, so our applicant has requested tabling. I see no issue with tabling.
I don't either.
Given all this information. And I would suggest that we do it for 1 month to our next scheduled meeting.
Question, okay, go ahead.
I would just raise a clarification also to the applicant in that tabling isn't an opportunity for like more information to be submitted. Essentially, it's a pause in time. So when we reconvene in April, you're picking right back up in the discussion, and the applicant will be more informed and more familiar with, the status of what's in the packet. But it's not time to contribute more to the application. I would say right now we're kind of, the time is closed to add stuff to this case, and you're reviewing based off of what's been submitted for this.
Okay. The 60-day clock doesn't start since it's a request from the applicant?
This is still running on those timelines, but we have, I can always extend it an additional 60 days. So
Okay.
we should be fine within that 1 month allowance.
Okay.
Thanks for that
Thank
consideration.
you.
Mr. Chair, question of clarification. So by tabling it, next month, we would essentially take up the same variance request. It cannot be modified.
That's my
No.
interpretation of it, and I wanted to make that clear for the applicant to understand that, it's you guys granting him time to consume this information and feel better informed. So when you make your decision, he understands what is in the packet. But it's not more time for him to add more, because this is what's been public noticed, so any substantial changes. The kind of caveat to that, sometimes things are tabled if you guys are asking for specific information. So, sometimes you come and you're like, maybe the highway department could tell us what they think about this road. And those are things that we'll do sometimes for tabling. But when an applicant's requesting it, and you want to chip in? Yeah.
just a little bit, Board, that the applicant, if there are questions that are coming up and concerns that have come up during the read of the narrative, the applicant does have the ability to provide clarifying information, that the ultimate request of the variance doesn't change, all right? So Neva is correct in the fact that you can't like change the variance, okay, I want it 6 feet, no, I want it 12 feet. You can't change what the variance is what the variance is, but the board can table it to request clarifying information, and the applicant can request the tabling of it to be able to provide more clarifying information. But it's just, it's essentially the same request. It's just providing clarifying information that may have come up during the course of the reading of the report or so.
So, Mr. Chair, it might be a reasonable question to ask, even if the rhetorical question, we don't need to answer, but even if the applicant provides some additional pieces of information, it really doesn't change the variance request that they have made, which it seems to be the issues that are causing the problem with approval.
And I can also understand, though, that the applicant probably got this package last week, and it's voluminous, and there's a lot of counter arguments in there, and an opportunity to absorb it and feel that he understands it better and is better able to respond to things is also perfectly reasonable, because it wouldn't want him, he's already stated he feels overwhelmed by it, so I want to respect that.
I guess I would like to just ask the applicant, sir, are you following the discussion and feel?
Yes. Yeah,
you
I
understand
am.
what
I don't know if it's appropriate or whatever, but comments about erosion, we haven't seen erosion anywhere along that shoreline, along the whole 176 feet. Comment about trees, yes, we've had some wind damage, et cetera, trees that were broken off at the top, et cetera, and I did cut, I think, 2 trees, one about maybe 8 inches and one about 6 this last summer, but that was a damage thing, and I didn't want them falling in the lake, and so that's a comment, whether you care to hear it or not, I don't know, but
That's fine.
I just wanted to be upfront. I'm not out there to take into Ms. Maxwell's comments about vegetation. In the summer, the vegetation in front of that, you don't see the base of the cabin. The only thing you see is the deck rail, because everything's growing up there, and you see the deck rail on the one picture, but you're not seeing that base of the cabin, which in fact is all rock. It's all split rock, the whole base my dad did. So I think it's very handsome, but it is covered with vegetation in the summer.
So,
Anyway, again, you didn't ask for that, but
what I guess I would like to ask you directly right now is, would you still like us to table this based on the discussion, or would you like us to act tonight?
I personally would feel better if we tabled it, because I feel I need to, again, really get into some of the nitty-gritty and try and understand, because to be honest with you, the DNR letter, I think it's got a number of issues with it, but it seems, anyway,
Thank you.
I don't, sitting here today, I couldn't give you facts,
Okay.
chapter and verse, so I'd rather table it if that's okay.
And hearing that, I would, I think if we, as a board, think that that's reasonable, I would look for
I
that
certainly think
motion.
so.
Yep.
One of you make that motion if you feel it's appropriate.
I move we table this variance request as requested by the applicant
To the next scheduled
to the
meeting.
next scheduled meeting, yes.
I would second that motion.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, your motion table.
So back in April.
And that'll be April 9th.
9th?
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That way it won't be the
Thank you
next one.
for your consideration.
I think, I'm sure I am, so. Carolyn and Kai Sackstrup, 2025 5V.
Thank you, Mr.
Go
Chair.
ahead, Neva.
This is a variance request for after-the-fact relief from the Cook County Zoning Ordinance to place a 140-square-foot sauna within the bluff impact zone and at a reduced top-of-bluff setback where a minimum setback of 30 feet is required, as well as a reduced shoreline setback of 38 feet where a minimum of 40 feet is required at 4236 Cascade Beach Road. The applicant's property includes 1.80 acres with approximately 352 feet of Lake Superior shoreline. The parcel is contained entirely within the single-family residential zone district. Zoning requirements for newly created lots on Lake Superior must be 1 acre in size and 200 feet wide. This is a conforming parcel. And Lake Superior is classified as a general development lake, and its development standards are outlined in the North Shore Management Plan and adopted in Article 8 of the Cook County Zoning Ordinance. Mr. and Mrs. Sackstrup are requesting after-the-fact relief to allow the unpermitted sauna to remain within the bluff impact zone and shoreline setbacks along Lake Superior. The 140-square-foot sauna was placed by their contractor in 2023 within the bluff impact zone, 14 feet from the top of bluff. The sauna also encroaches within the shoreline setback 38 feet from the vegetation line. In the packet, I included a diagram that reminds viewers about the bluff impact zone being that area that's the first 20 feet from the top of bluff, in which case no structures are to be allowed within the bluff impact zone, and that general structure setback requirement is 30 feet from top of bluff. The applicants have provided a survey that's very helpful to understand some of these features on their property. Staff tried to provide a little annotation on top of that survey. So the red line on that survey diagram is indicating the top of bluff. The orange line is indicating the 30-foot top of bluff structure setback. And then the green line is marking the bluff impact zone, so the first 20 feet from top of bluff. And you'll see the sauna is with the top of bluff line kind of crossing through the center of it there. For backgrounds, the property currently has a house, shed, and sauna. The property is in a residential area along Cascade Beach Road. I included photos in your packet. On page 133, you can see coming down off of Cascade Beach Road towards the driveway, the house, and then the sauna in the middle with a wood shed over on the right. And then the photo on the bottom of that page is showing the sauna relative to the shoreline and the house. For site conditions and considerations, the septic is service the property, and the survey shows the treatment area is located in the northeast corner of the parcel by the road. Impervious surface coverage, the parcel development is within the allowable 25% impervious surface coverage allowance. Wetlands are not an issue driving the need for the variance. The parcel has a steep bluff along the shoreline. Shoreline health, the survey indicates an undermined bank indicating erosion is occurring along the bluff face. For other, the application indicates that the landscape of this lot is irregular and causes the need for the variance. The landscape of this lot is a more natural, rugged terrain. However, it is also typical for North Shore landscape and is often addressed through the use of decks, patios, footings, and footpaths. The sauna was built on piers and could feasibly be placed elsewhere on the property with uneven terrain. No land use permits are required for accessory structures less than 161 square feet, provided they meet setbacks. Just a note to the relocation statement about the sauna, the applicants did inform me that because of the construction of the sauna, it would need to be pretty much fully dismantled in order to be relocated. It couldn't just be picked up and moved. For more, have some photos. It's a very picturesque sauna, so there's some nice, it was very beautiful, and I have some nice photos of it on site. It was a very perfect picture-taking day when I was out there. Some aerial imagery that we have access to shows the differences on the lot between 2018 and 2024. So the photo on the right is the 2018, and then as the applicants explained in their application, there's been some wind damage that removed some trees, and they chose to place a sauna in a location where some tree removal naturally occurred. For public noticing, the application was legally noticed in the Cook County News Herald on February 14th. 12 letters of notification were sent to adjacent property owners as well as county departments and the DNR hydrologist. No written comments were received from adjoining property owners during the written comment period. Cook County Soil and Water Conservation District provided a technical memo that explains the shoreline vegetation changes over time at this property and the removal of most of the trees and shrubs on the bluff. The SWCD cites resources for the landowners to consider to improve their shoreline. The DNR area hydrologist provided a technical memo outlining their review of the variance request relative to the practical difficulty standards. The DNR recommends denial of the variance based off of 4 reasons. Number 1, there's no unique circumstances associated with the property, and the variance request is needed for personal matters. Number 2, the variance is not reasonable given the purpose of the setback requirements, stating that the applicant hasn't demonstrated why it's necessary to build so close to the bluff, a significant deviation from regulations when there's other alternatives that don't require a variance. Number 3, the variance will alter the essential character of the area, citing the lack of screening from vegetation and accelerated stormwater flow of the bluff. And number 4, the DNR finds the primary reason for the variance is a design preference, and approval of the variance would be arbitrary and capricious. For staff consideration for facts and findings off of the variance questions, number 1, the Cook County Zoning Ordinance requires a 40-foot setback from Lake Superior. The applicant is requesting a 38-foot from the setback. And the zoning ordinance requires a setback from the top of bluff to be 30 feet and no structures be allowed within the bluff impact zone. The structure is fully within the structure setback area, being 14 feet from the top of the bluff, encroaching 6 feet into the bluff impact zone. I also provided some citations of the Cook County Land Use Guide Plan for reference. Second question, the proposed use of the property is allowed in the land use district in which the property is located. The parcel is zoned single-family residential. The property includes 1.80 acres with approximately 352 feet of Lake Superior shoreline. Residential uses are permitted in this zone district. The property owner is proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted within the Cook County Zoning Ordinance. The Cook County Zoning Ordinance does not include provisions that allow water-oriented accessory structures to be placed with the shore or bluff setbacks. Accessory structures are allowed on properties, provided the structure is placed meeting all structure setbacks and meeting the provisions outlined in the Cook County Zoning Ordinance. The structure was placed fully within the bluff setback area and within the bluff impact zone. Alternative locations on the property could serve to place the structure that would allow reasonable use and enjoyment with much less or no variance relief required. Reasonableness can also be evaluated by considering both the size of the structure and the extent of the variance requested. In this case, the entire sauna is within the bluff setback and significantly encroaches into the setback area. The property owner has established that the practical difficulty involved is due to circumstances unique to the property and not created by the property owner. The application indicates that the location of the sauna was chosen due to the undulating hilly topography of the area and accessibility of the building. The applicants indicated that they have plans to add a garage and a shed, which further limits options for sauna site. A practical difficulty cannot be landowner created. A variance to grant encroachment into the bluff cannot be granted for the reason that other space on the property is being prioritized and set aside for future development. Uneven topography is common in Cook County. Landowners often achieve this through the use of platform, decking, or fill materials as the existing sauna utilized in its existing non-conforming location. Removal of trees and regrading soil is an acceptable means in building, and trying to avoid that is not a practical difficulty. The application indicates that the building site was chosen in part due to storm removing trees, which cleared an area for building. The convenience of a clearing location occurring naturally is not a valid practical difficulty. Land development often requires the removal of trees to building conforming locations. From the staff's perspective, the application has not demonstrated a valid practical difficulty because it's not unique to the property and is landowner created. Staff do not identify a valid practical difficulty necessitating the need for the variance. The DNR finds that the facts do not support a valid practical difficulty being present and identify the main need for the variance as landowner design preference. The area is zoned single-family residential. The sauna is clearly visible from the road and lakeshore. However, given the structure's small size, it is unlikely that it would alter the essential character of the locality. And the relocation of the structure to a conforming location would likely require some economic burden to the property owners. However, this burden cannot be the only reason to grant the variance request. For staff recommendations for consideration, staff agrees with the findings of the DNR that the facts of this case do not present a sufficient practical difficulty to justify the variance. After reviewing the application materials, staff have not identified a valid practical difficulty. Land development typically involves activities such as tree removal, grading, or filling to level building areas and walkways, and using decks, patios, or pavers to create walkways. Given these methods and others, it seems feasible to find alternative locations for this accessory structure that would meet the required setbacks. The application mentions further future building plans for a garage and tool shed. However, a variance cannot be granted based on a practical difficulty created by a property owner. Considering the conforming size of the property and the relatively small size of the structure, staff do not find it reasonable to grant a variance for the reasons outlined in the application. With the appropriate land development practices, the challenges posed by uneven terrain can be addressed, allowing for the structure to be located in a conforming building location. And then I also included some ideas from the DNR. Should you find findings that would support an approval of the variance, the DNR listed out some considerations for potential conditions of approval.
Thank you, Neela. With the owners, would you like, state your name and address and add anything to the narrative if you'd like?
Sure. Carolyn Sackstrup and
Kai Sackstrup.
28 St. Albans Road West in Hopkins. That is our current permanent address. We hope someday that our permanent address will be up here. Right now we are seasonal. But would just add in this, and I did say this to Neva last week, in that we try to be good community citizens. It is not typical for us to come asking forgiveness rather than permission. We're more permission people, intend to be that, and do not come here having intended to, did not build the sauna having intended to be in violation. So we did, as noted, choose the site after some trees blew down because we're trying our very best to not remove any trees. We love trees, and worked with a local contractor who said as long as you're under 140 square feet, you don't need a permit, and we just need to be within 40 feet of the vegetation line, which we tried to be. Got a survey done after all of that when we started thinking about the garage, and learned through that survey process that we were actually at 38 feet according to that survey process. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's much to add. I mean, I think, appreciate if you're sitting here and listening to this, I think this is the first time for us to go through something like this, so I think understand the process, but I don't know if there's much to add.
Yeah, we've learned a lot. We appreciate the work that you do, and thank you for your consideration.
Anyone from the public wish to speak on this?
Diane?
Not hearing any? We're going to close it to the public and discuss it as a board. Who's ready to start?
Yeah, I can start. I did a site visit. I concur with staff in terms of, you've built a very nice looking building, and it's well done, but it also have the fact that when I was walking there earlier this afternoon, walking towards the bluff, I made it a point not to go to the edge, because you could tell just by looking at it, there's erosion occurring under, and there's going to be a collapse in time. Just the nature of the lake and water and ice and its impacts, which is the reason we have the bluffs. I've seen on other variances that we've looked at where I've gone up, and there actually would already been a collapse by the time I got there, in certain circumstances. So the concern is, for the protection of the lake, your property, its value, all the other things that is incorporated into the law. This is we're not talking about a couple of feet here, right? The whole building is located inside the bluff impact zone. I concur with staff that there are other locations. All of us have built up here. So we're very familiar with the challenges. And as I looked around, it was clear that there were spaces that could be used. Even, with the, like snow storage, right? I just get my snow blower out and keep throwing it on top of the pile, right? Where I can put it. And it's just the nature of living up here. Just in general, not in favor of the variance, because the practical use just doesn't qualify in my mind. The practical difficulty, excuse me, I misstated that.
I also made a site visit. I would agree that I think practical difficulty is the issue here, because there's so much other buildable area, like Brad said. I guess I will make the point to just wax philosophical here for a minute, if it's not out of line. I do think it's difficult to find fault with the property owner if there's no permitting process to alert you to the fact that you're not in the setback, or that you're out of the setback, rather. You know what I mean? That if you don't go through the process, and then you find out after the fact that you're in the bluff setback, which I think is a particularly hard one to know as a lay person. You understand a side yard setback, you understand a road setback even. Those are clear and easy to measure. A bluff setback, I feel like, is a lot more technical and a lot more difficult to determine. So if we're not holding someone through a permitting process to verify the location of their building, I do take some issue with that. I don't think that undermines the issue that it's built on a bluff that could collapse and we have to deal with that. But I don't like that as a process.
No, I
point,
agree with everything you just said.
That puts people in a difficult position to have built something that, you have to have some technical knowledge to know you didn't have, you couldn't build there. So I just want to make that point for the record. I find that difficult as a property owner, as a county citizen.
I don't really think there's much that I can add other than it is absolutely beautiful and stunning, and it would be, it's a great view, but while I feel with that bluff being right there with the erosion, it's way too close.
Mr. Chair, I walk by this site 3 times a week, maybe 5 times a week, depending on when it is, because I walk Cascade Beach Road a lot. And unfortunately, I watched it get built and kind of scratched my head a little bit as to if the permitting process was correct. But anyways, and to me, that's a phone call away to, which is what I always tell people, if you aren't sure, make a call. And I would agree with what's been said. There's a lot of room on the site. It could go other places. And I think DNR made a fairly strong argument as to why it shouldn't be there. Because it is, we're talking for a variance of over 50% on the setback. So it feels too large.
Yeah.
I think, just for clarification, we should go through our findings of facts. So first question is the variance consistent with the goals and policies of the comprehensive land use guide plan and in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the Cook County Zoning Ordinance and other Cook County official controls? How do you guys feel about that?
I think no. I think that's the first reference of the bluff impact zone right there.
Is the proposed use of the property is allowed in the land use district in which the property is located? Yeah, I think the use is allowed.
Yes.
We're just really looking at
Yes,
the
they're
location.
compliant there.
The property owner is proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the Cook County Zoning Ordinance.
Well, it is permitted as long as you meet the setback
Right.
requirements, yeah.
Property owner has established that the practical difficulty involved is due to circumstances unique to the property and not created by the property owner.
So no.
That's the one right there. Approving the variance, will approving the variance maintain the essential character of the locality?
It would.
I think read,
Yeah.
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 Has the property owner established that the practical difficulty involves more than economic considerations alone?
No.
I think it was more than economic. I don't know that economic really was even discussed. I think it was the trees and wanting to remove other vegetation.
Right, I perfectly well understand their motives and why. We just ran into this circumstance of practical difficulty.
I would look for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to deny the variance request.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none.
So patient, guys.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, Mayor?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
You'll second that?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
You guys glad we have the second meeting plans
Oh,
now?
yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I had a choice to make, whether we try to